So friends, this is the 10th week running, and now we have gone on serious topics in both obstetrics and in gynecology. In gynecology, now we are going to discuss a very important and not a very easily understood topic called as urogynecology. This is a very vast topic. It has a lot of topics to be discussed, and today is the first class of urogynecology in which we'll try to understand the basics of this chapter. This chapter I'm going to be discussing everything about the bladder. That means I'll start with the basics, that is anatomy, physiology. I'll take you through the journey of different kind of incontinence, the terminology, the different kind of tests that you have to incorporate to understand which kind of incontinence is this patient having, and then of course the treatment, which is both surgical and medical. So there's a long way to go, but today's class I'm going to be discussing about the basics. I'll be dividing these classes into smaller segments for the simple reason that it's easier for you to understand, go through again and again, and you can finish it in small span of time because you get very little time in between. So I try to include maximum and minimum amount of time so that you're able to understand the topic better by seeing it repeatedly. And these smaller sections that I'll be making, the students who have subscribed to my classes will be getting all the segments. For the rest of you, you can see whatever lecture I post on YouTube. I will not be posting, of course, all the segments of my lecture for everybody. But yes, for that you can subscribe to my classes, and then you'll be able to get not just the study material, but all my lectures, including everything about every topic. So let's not waste time. Let's start with the basics of about the bladder, the anatomy and the physiology of micturition in today's class. Let's start with the anatomy of bladder. See, we can divide the bladder anatomy into, just to understand, the bladder consists of an area which is called the dome, the area which is a trigon, in which you have both the ureteric orifices and the urethral orifice very close to that area, and then of course the urethra. The basic part of the dome of the bladder can be divided into the mucosa, which is the innermost lining, the muscular part of the bladder, which is actually nothing but the detrusor muscle, and the serosa, which is actually the outermost covering of the bladder. Anteriorly, the bladder is associated with the pubic symphysis and the endopelvic fascia. Posteriorly, it is associated with the fascia, the vagina, and the ureter and the uterus, of course. And laterally, again, with the pelvic fascia surrounding it. See, it has a very complex pelvic fascia surrounding it. It has so many muscles. It has pubococcygeus. It has the superficial perineal muscles. It has the levator ani around it. You've already studied about this pelvic anatomy before in your previous classes, so I'm not going into that much of depth, but yes, a broad sense of understanding, because when I'll be talking about the sling operations, at that point in time I'll just refresh the related anatomy in that particular case, for making you understand that why did we use this kind of sling, why did we go in for this kind of tape, what are we trying to strengthen in this particular point. So about the anatomy, that was all, and now let us try to understand about the physiology of micturition. See, basically there are three kind of innervations to the bladder. There is a parasympathetic innervation to the bladder, which basically secretes acetylcholine at its synaptic junction. Then you have the sympathetic system, which secretes norepinephrine, noradrenaline at its synaptic junction. And then we have the motor innervation, that is the somatic nerve, which is under voluntary control. Parasympathetic and sympathetic systems, basically they're not under our control. They are basically reflex generated, and they are basically connected to that's what we say spinal level, that is at the spinal column, and they are basically controlled by the brainstem over here, and the pontine area is the one, the pons, the area and the pons is the one which tries to regulate the reflexes of micturition. So let us go in a little bit of depth to understand this. See, there is one detrusor muscle, okay, then there is a muscle in the urethra. So basically you have, when the detrusor muscle, it contracts and the urethral muscle relaxes, there is voiding of the urine. this is actually the stimulation which is given, which is basically by the parasympathetic nervous system. So you can say the parasympathetic nervous system basically is responsible for evacuating the bladder, and the sympathetic system is basically trying to relax the bladder. So the parasympathetic nervous system has its own receptors, and the sympathetic nervous system has its own receptors in both the detrusor muscle and the urethra. And whenever there is a parasympathetic afferent, it is usually responsible for just relaxing the muscle of the urethra and constricting the detrusor muscle and evacuating or voiding of the urine. The other thing is done by the sympathetic nervous system. And one more important thing is that, see, whenever we're talking about parasympathetic nervous system, we've been doing this from a long time, that they've got their synaptic junction or the ganglia located right close to the organ that they are innervating. Whereas that is not the case with the sympathetic nervous system. They have the ganglia somewhere outside, and then they release the efferents to the particular target organ. But that is not very relevant. It's just a point which I wanted to mention because that's there in the book. And then there is something. See, if everything is not under our control, how is it that we only void when the social surroundings allow us to? So there is one very important system, that is the somatic innervation or motor nervous system, motor system that is under our control, and that is this pudendal nerve that is responsible for constricting the urethral muscle and will only release it when there are social conditions are viable, social conditions are allowing it to. So what happens when there is, the bladder is empty, it's filling. So usually at the time of filling, the parasympathetic system is quiescent and the sympathetic nervous system is dominating, and because of which you have relaxation of the detrusor muscle, and urethral muscle is constricting, and that's how the bladder is filling. Now this is, it's very well understood that is how it happens. But what happens when the bladder is totally filled? At that point in time, I expect the parasympathetic system to take over and you should immediately void. But this is where somatic nervous system comes into play. Pudendal nerve is the one which comes into play. It innervates the urethral junction, and it is responsible for constricting the urethra despite the fact that it is getting repeated impulses through the pontine system that you have to void, but it will only see the social area environment feasible, and then will it give the impulse for the bladder to void. And this is very simple physiology of micturition, which you can easily study from any book. It's all right, like I said, decently given in Novaks. You can always refer Novaks and read it. And there is a diagram which is given on page number 702. This diagram you should be able to see again, and you should be able to practice it. Even this kind of makeshift diagram is going to do. There's no need for making it very beautiful, but you should be able to make the examiner understand that you understand that what exactly is the complex interplay. They use the word complex so many times, you feel it's difficult, but actually it's very simple and easy. If you just simply understand the interplay of parasympathetic nervous system, sympathetic nervous system, and a little bit of they've also thrown this acetylcholine and norepinephrine in between, which is again not very relevant to make you understand the physiology. But if you write down these things as well, examiner is going to be more than happy to give you the marks. So this was all about physiology of micturition, and I hope to see you in the next class, in which we'll be talking about a little more about urogynecology.